You ever wonder what life really looks like behind royal gates? Not the polished photos, not the parades, but the quiet halls when no one's watching. Because behind the grandeur of Royal Lodge, the home once shared by Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, things weren't what they seemed. They say the walls of that house have heard things the public never will. But maybe, just maybe, it's time they did. Inside those walls, there wasn't laughter echoing through the halls. There was tension. Fear, a silence so thick it made people hold their breath. Former staff, people who once walked those corridors every day, say life under Andrew wasn't royal, it was rigid. Rules for everything, how to fold his shirts, how to serve his breakfast, even how to line up his shoes. One maid said it best. You didn't work with him. You worked for him. And you always knew your next mistake could be your last. Imagine living like that, walking on eggshells in a palace, knowing that a curtain pulled an inch too far or a spoon placed slightly off-center could set off an outburst. Staff said they could hear his voice long before they saw him. He didn't need to enter a room to make people feel small, and yet it's strange. Even after all that, Royal Lodge became a place he refused to leave. The lease said he could stay as long as he maintained the property. But the truth? It's not about maintenance. It's about control. The same control he tried to keep over everyone else, now over the walls themselves. Then there were the teddy bears. 72 of them, each one in a sailor suit or uniform, not lying around like childhood memories, but lined up in perfect military order. Every morning, the staff had to arrange them from largest to smallest before he entered the room. Miss one spot and you'd hear about it. There was even a laminated chart kept by his bed showing exactly where each bear should go. Some were placed on the bed. Others stood like silent guards around the room. And when night came, the bears had to be moved again into precise, pre-approved positions. It sounds absurd. But for the people who worked there, this wasn't a joke. It was their job. And it said everything about the man they served, controlling, unpredictable, and desperately clinging to an image of order in a world that no longer saw him as royal. Even the security officers used to handling the toughest situations said the same thing. He was impossible. One said you could feel his temper before he spoke. Another said it wasn't the shouting that got to you. It was the way he made you feel invisible. And through all of it, Sarah Ferguson was there too. Once described as warm, friendly, approachable, but as her marriage crumbled and the world turned critical, even she changed. The charm faded. The tension grew, and what was once a family home began to feel like a battleground. Now, years later, the crown has made it official. Andrew's titles are gone. His role is gone. Even his name was stripped down to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And yet, he still clings to that house. Royal Lodge, the last fortress of a fallen prince. It's hard not to wonder. Was it pride that kept him there? Or fear of what life looks like outside those gates, where there's no title to hide behind and no one left to control? Behind every scandal, every headline, there's a person trying to hold on to what's slipping away. And maybe that's what makes this story so haunting. Not the royal drama, but the silence of a man who once ruled his household like a king and now stands alone in a house full of empty rooms and teddy bears that never talk back. Have you ever noticed how some stories start with glamour and end with silence? Behind the gates of Royal Lodge, that grand, sprawling estate once shared by Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, life was never as royal as it looked from the outside, because while the curtains were drawn and the cameras stayed away, what unfolded inside those walls was something else entirely, a story of tension, control, and slow collapse. Former staff say working for Andrew was like living under a storm that never quite passed. Every sound, every step, every word measured, watched. You never knew which version of him you were going to get, polite one moment, shouting the next, and in that house, even the smallest things mattered. A breakfast tray slightly off-center. Shoes are not lined up perfectly, or the infamous teddy bears, dozens of them, dressed in sailor suits, arranged in a specific order, largest to smallest, every single morning. There was even a laminated chart beside his bed showing where each bear should go like a battle plan. Miss a single one and someone would pay for it. It sounds ridiculous from the outside, but for those living it, it wasn't funny. Daily life is rigid, tense, exhausting. Even senior royal aides admitted privately, Andrew's temper was legendary. Many would rather work for anyone else. And inside Royal Lodge, that tension never really left. You could feel it in the air, the kind that makes people speak softer, move slower, breathe quieter. Sarah Ferguson, though, was different, at least in the beginning. When she first joined the royal fold, people described her as warm, friendly, and full of energy. She'd chat with the staff, laugh easily, and make everyone feel comfortable. But over time, that warmth started to fade. As her marriage fell apart and the world turned its eyes on her, the pressure began to show. One former aide said Sarah could be kind one minute and cutting the next. She could cry, she could shout it all depending on the day. Another said she once left a staff member in tears after a minor mistake. Yet despite the mood swings, Sarah often became the only person who could calm Andrew down when his temper spiraled. And that's what kept them together long after the love was gone. Two divorced ex-spouses still living under the same roof, bound not by romance but by routine. For years they called themselves the world's happiest divorced couple. But even that illusion couldn't last forever, because now everything has changed. Andrew, stripped of his titles, honors, and privileges, has been told to leave Royal Lodge. The home he's fought to keep is no longer his. The Crown has ordered him to relocate to a smaller residence on the Sandringham estate, a quiet corner of Norfolk, far from Windsor's shadow. Sarah, meanwhile, won't be joining him. She sold her own $4 million home earlier this year, believing she'd stay at Royal Lodge indefinitely. But with Andrew's lease revoked, that dream has vanished. Insiders say she's devastated. Royal Lodge wasn't just a house to her, it was her safe place, the last piece of royal life she could still hold on to. And now, for the first time in 2 decades, they'll live apart. He'll go one way, she'll go again. Two people who built their lives around a shared past are now forced to face a separate future. For the staff who lived through it, this ending feels poetic. They remember the strict rules, the silent rooms, the constant unease. A house that looked majestic on the outside, but inside, it was filled with pressure, ego, and control. Maybe that's why their story feels so heavy now. Because behind the crowns and the ceremonies, life in the royal world can be anything but royal. Andrew's downfall isn't just about scandal anymore. It's about what happens when power becomes habit and pride becomes a prison. And Sarah? She's standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. A life without titles, without protection, without the gates that once made her feel important. As for their daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, they've quietly stepped back. Both have left the UK seeking peace far from the noise. Eugenie's spending time in Portugal with her husband, while Beatrice divides her life between the US and Europe. Insiders say they've had enough of the chaos, and maybe that says everything. The House of York, once a symbol of unity, is now scattered. A father stripped of status, a mother without a home, 2 daughters searching for distance from it all. In the end, Royal Lodge has become a symbol not of royalty, but of what's lost when control replaces compassion. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in all of this. Behind every royal gate lies a truth that no one wants to see that sometimes. The greatest fall doesn't come from scandal. It comes from forgetting how to be human. Prince Andrew is no longer a prince. And maybe the real question isn't why now, but why it took this long. Buckingham Palace has confirmed what many saw coming. King Charles has begun the formal process of stripping his younger brother of his remaining royal titles. From now on, he'll simply be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The man who once carried the title Duke of York has been reduced to a name. And behind that name lies a story the world is only beginning to understand. Because while the outside world saw castles, privilege, and polished appearances, life behind the gates of Royal Lodge told a very different story. Former staff are now speaking out, revealing what it was really like to serve under Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. A home built not on kindness, but control. They describe a house where rules were everything. Emotions were dangerous, and one man's temper set the tone for everyone inside. You could feel the tension before you even walked in. One former employee said, you could hear him shouting before you saw him. Another said the fear wasn't loud, it was quiet. The kind of fear that makes you move slower, speak less, and hope you don't get noticed. Even his own protection officers saw it with the same sharpness. The same arrogance, the same temper ready to explode over the smallest detail. And the smallest things did matter. A curtain pulled too tight. A breakfast tray an inch off center. Shoes are not lined up perfectly. Inside Royal Lodge, there were rules for everything. How the bed was made, how the clothes were folded, how the staff stood when he entered the room. If someone got it wrong, there were consequences. Public scolding, cold silence, sometimes dismissal. One insider said it best: you were there to serve, not to speak. But among all the strange habits and strict demands, one story stands out: the teddy bears. 70 of them, maybe more, each one dressed in sailor suits and little uniforms. Every morning before Andrew entered his bedroom, staff had to line them up in precise order, largest to smallest, across the bed. If even one was out of place, it could set off an outburst. New staff were even trained on it. A laminated diagram sat beside the bed, showing the exact position of every single toy like a map of a battlefield. One former guard said it wasn't funny, it was eerie. Because it wasn't just about bears, it was about control, about order, about needing the world to stay exactly as he demanded it to be. Inside Royal Lodge, it didn't feel like a royal home. It felt like a military base. The atmosphere was heavy. Predictable routines, careful steps, quiet hallways. People weren't living there, they were surviving. And while Andrew's behavior made most of the headlines, Sarah Ferguson left her own mark. In her early years, she was everything Andrew wasn't: warm, approachable, full of laughter. The staff said she talked to them like equals, asked questions, remembered names. For a while, she was the heart of the house. But as her marriage fell apart and the world turned against her, that warmth began to fade. The pressure changed her. One former aide said her mood could turn in a second from friendly to furious, depending on the day. Some remembered moments of kindness. Others, moments that left them shaken. One staff member even left the house in tears after a confrontation that spiraled out of control. And yet, despite all of it, the shouting, the rules, the tension, Sarah often became the only person who could calm Andrew down when his temper took over. They were divorced, yes, but they still lived under the same roof. Bound by habit, by history, and maybe by a strange kind of loyalty that neither could fully let go of. Now, with his titles gone and his royal privileges stripped away, that bond has been tested like never before. For years they stood together not as husband and wife, but as two people holding on to the last remnants of their royal past. But that chapter is closing, and behind it, we're left with a haunting truth that inside the palaces and the titles and the family crests, there are people struggling to hold their lives together just like anyone else. The difference is, when they fall, the whole world watches. Prince Andrew has officially been stripped of his royal title. But the real question is, why now? Buckingham Palace confirmed today that King Charles has initiated a formal process. From this moment on, the king's younger brother will no longer be His Royal Highness. He will simply be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, once a prince, now a man without status. This is the inside story of the fall of the House of York. Scene 1, behind Royal Lodge footage, exterior of Royal Lodge, Windsor. Behind the walls of Royal Lodge, life wasn't as royal as it seemed. Former staff describe an atmosphere filled with tension, fear, and strict control. According to insiders, Prince Andrew was short-tempered, demanding, and impossible to please. Even the smallest mistake, a curtain pulled too tightly or a tray slightly off-center, could trigger his anger. One former maid said, "You could hear him shouting before you even saw him." Those who worked there lived in constant anxiety. Walking on eggshells every day. Scene 2. The teddy bear routine footage. Slow pan over stuffed bears lined on a bed among. The strangest stories from Royal Lodge was Andrew's obsession with his teddy bears. He owned over 70 of them, each dressed in tiny sailor or military uniforms. Every morning, before he entered his bedroom, staff had to line them up in precise order, from largest to smallest. A laminated diagram beside his bed showed exactly where each bear should go. If one was out of place, it could lead to a full-blown outburst. New employees even had to go through bear arrangement training before working in his room. Scene 3. Inside the rules footage palace interior. Uniformed servants working quietly, Royal Lodge was run like a military base. There were rules for everything: How shirts were folded, how shoes were placed, even how his breakfast tray was aligned. Staff said mistakes weren't just frowned upon, they were punished. Public scolding was common. Questioning orders? Unthinkable. As one insider put it, you were there to serve, not to speak. Scene 4. The Duchess of York. Footage: Sarah Ferguson. Public appearances: Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, started out as warm and friendly. She would laugh with the staff, chat about her day, and make people feel comfortable. But as her marriage fell apart,